All right, so here we are, the last week of the campaign. I mean, a week from now, we are going to get ready for the polls to close in Indiana, Kentucky, and then more polls to close. And then this nightmare will finally be over. We'll maybe have some idea of how this thing went or not. We'll see. But we are finally in the last week. And with that being the case, campaigns are starting to adjust. So there's some really good news for the Harris campaign when it comes to the blue wall. So we'll talk about that as well. But there's some other news as well that might not be as good, but I don't think it's necessarily as bad as we think. So let's go ahead and get into the kind of bad-ish news right now. So the iffy bad news, however you want to look at it, is that yesterday Kamala Harris's campaign did a $2.7 million buy in North Carolina, but now they have pulled $2 million from that. So this is actually from a Twitter account called Ad Impact Politics. Okay, you might not have heard of them, but they have Dan Pfeiffer and Tim Miller actually following them. So to me, that indicates, hey, if you have these two big comm guys actually following it, it's a legitimate source. So yeah, it does seem like Kamala Harris has actually pulled $2 million out of North Carolina. Now, a lot of people might be panicking and saying, oh, that's bad, that doesn't look good. I actually am relieved that they have done that for a few reasons. One, as we have talked about in this video time and time again over the last few days, North Carolina is not performing at the level it needs to perform. The Democrats should be ahead, and turnout right now should be ahead in the amount of voters of the composition, and they're not. The Republicans are ahead in both of those metrics. This early vote metric, both the vote by mail and in-person voting, needs to be something that the Democrats win, but they're now behind in it, and I think the Harris campaign sees that, and they're pulling their money out. Now, you might say, well, that's a bad idea. No, that's actually a good idea, because what they're doing is they're adjusting to the reality of what there is. Why spend money in a state like North Carolina, which is getting a higher and higher turnout rates with less and less voters that you're targeting, compared to, let's say, maybe a state like Pennsylvania or a state like Arizona, where a lot of non-party affiliate voters are still out there to vote. Same thing with Nevada as well. So them pulling out of North Carolina, I actually think, for me, gives me a sigh of relief, just because it means they're adjusting to the reality of what the map looks like now. So they might put the money in Georgia. They might put it, like I said, in Pennsylvania or something like that. Who knows? But it is a good sign. So let's go ahead and go over to the Nowcast models for the non-party registration states, the ones that just have regular registered voters, because Wisconsin and Michigan are looking very, very strong for the Democrats right now. So let's go ahead and look at those numbers right now. So as you can see in Georgia, you can see that the numbers haven't changed from yesterday. You see that the Democrat ceiling is 56% and their floor is 43%. And essentially it's almost the same for the Republicans. I mentioned in my live stream yesterday that Georgia all of a sudden got really, really close. Let's see how that turnout rate goes. They're still on pace to break the turnout rate in Georgia. We don't know right now, but we'll see how that goes. But a good day for Democrats over the weekend and yesterday. Now, if we look at Wisconsin and Michigan, we can see that those numbers are good for the Democrats, with the ceiling in Wisconsin at 54.5%, with the floor at 48.4%, which of course that would be a Republican win. But we see the ceiling in Michigan much, much higher for the Democrats, and their floor a little bit lower. So there's more variance in that vote. The good thing about both the Wisconsin and the Michigan models is that the numbers are not moving. The numbers are staying steady. And if these high numbers for the Democrats, which they won't hit the high numbers, but the fact that their high number is much, much higher than the Republicans' high number means that you are seeing the states solidifying. With Wisconsin, we are now over 42% of the vote. There was 75 to 77% last time in the election. So we're already, if we're looking at the last election in 2020, almost or past the halfway point actually in that. Michigan, as I've mentioned before, is a low turnout state, but we already have, if we go by the 2020 numbers, we essentially already have a third of the vote in, and we might get a lot more in, and we're probably going to be higher than 50% of the vote being from early in-person and early absentee ballots. So these numbers in Michigan and Wisconsin look really, really good. The numbers in Texas still don't look that great. The Democrats have an uphill climb. But the one thing I do want to mention about Texas is that if we are actually seeing a shift in partisanship in Texas, as far as people identifying as Republicans and Democrats, or Republicans, independents, or independents and Democrats, if we're starting to see a Democratic shift, the old voter history won't be picking this up. So this model could be much, much more Democratic if the state has shifted much, much more Democratic. So if we look at two of the big blue wall states, we do see that they are pretty much starting to be a darn close lock for the Democrats. As I mentioned, the numbers from Michigan, put in the new numbers in the model today, it moved very, very little. It's pretty much going the same path as Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, as I mentioned yesterday, I put in the numbers today, it's getting more and more Democratic every day as turnout goes up. That is a great indication for Democrats. It just essentially means the places where Democrats need to turn out to vote, those turnout rates are higher than in places where the Republicans are. So this is a really good indication. So now let's go over to the Nowcast model for the states that do have partisan registration. All right, so if you look at the states with the partisan registration, MPV means major party vote. You see Pennsylvania has 64% for Democrats and 35.9% Republicans. That's what the Nowcast model says what the vote would be if the vote ended today. Now, I have an asterisk there. We'll talk about that in a few because I've been looking at Pennsylvania a little bit differently than other people, but I am now going to shift to the way that other people have been looking at it. Now, North Carolina, as we said, it looks like the Democrats are pulling out to some extent. So at least with the ad buys, probably not with the GOTV effort or whatever, but at least with the ad buys. This is why, because the Democrats should be leading in this number now. They should be leading right now, at least, having 52 to 53 or higher percent of the vote. So that is not a good indication. Nevada and Arizona, on the other hand, these are kind of problem childs for Democrats, but you can see that the Republicans do have nearly a 10-point advantage. Now, Nevada and Arizona are a little bit different. Let's start off with Arizona. So in Arizona, the issue is right now is that a lot of unaffiliated voters, independent voters, usually vote Democratic. So if you take Maricopa County, for example, you have the Republicans who are number one when it comes to voter registration in the county, independents are number two, and Democrats are number three. So Democrats have been winning in Maricopa County, not by the greatest amount, but by sometimes a little bit of a decent margin, 4, 5, 6, 7% or something like that. So that shows that a lot of those unaffiliated independent voters do vote Democratic in Arizona. It's not just there, it's Pima County and other counties as well. So that number has not turned out as far as independent voters. And because they're independent voters, they might wait till Election Day to vote. So this is something to keep an eye on, to watch that turnout number for independents. It's just not that high right now. So that is the situation when it comes to Arizona. Now, when it comes to Nevada, it's a little bit more worrying of a situation for the Democrats because you had a lot of rural Republicans turn out to vote, according to John Ralston and the reporting he has done. But the Democrats have not been able to turn out as many voters as they'd like in Clark County and in Washoe County. Essentially, the Democrats are just sitting and staying at home. Now, this is also a state where the independents tend to break Democratic, and they're not even turning out as well. Now, we can just have a situation where the Republicans turned out there to vote big time at the beginning, and it has a flip, but we haven't really seen that flip yet, and it's still looking stronger and stronger for the Republicans when it comes to that. Essentially, it seems like the Harry Reid machine and all that has just dissipated, is gone. Maybe there was irreparable harm when they actually had a change in leadership or whatnot, but it does not look good for the Democrats. We really have to get an idea, I think, over the next 2 days. If we see Clark County starting to improve, possibly the Democrats can do well. But right now, it's not looking good in Nevada. This could possibly be the next place where the Democrats pull their ads, even though they probably shouldn't because it's a relatively cheap market in the state of Nevada, and Reno is definitely a cheap market. Now let's go to Pennsylvania because there's something that I've been kind of poo-pooing for a while, and that is the amount of ballots returned, the percentage of ballots returned compared to the request numbers. Now, I usually say they don't mean anything. And in a lot of states like Florida, Georgia, whatever, they really don't mean anything, because when we get to this point in the election right now, if I get a mail ballot in, I can say, I'm not going to mail in my ballot. I'm just going to show up to early voting or whatever, right? I have multiple options. Essentially, in the state of Georgia, 100% of the people are eligible to vote right now. But in Pennsylvania, 100% of the people aren't eligible to vote. The only ones who are essentially eligible to vote right now are those people who have requested mail-in ballots. So that's only 23.8% of the entire state as far as voter registration. So that means over 3/4 of those who are registered to vote cannot even vote, because we don't have just the go in, stand in line, go to a ballot booth and fill out your ballot. We don't have that in Pennsylvania. So we only have 23.8% of the people who are eligible to vote right now. The rest can only vote on election day unless they go ahead and submit a ballot request, which some of them might have done. I don't know. But you are going to see the ballot or mail-in votes in almost all the states kind of flatline at this point, mostly because at this point, a lot of people don't mail their ballots in because they're worried if they're going to get in on time to be counted. So this is kind of an issue. But let's go ahead and look at some of the numbers that I put up to give you an idea of what's happening. All right, so this is the first thing I want to show you. So if you see registered Democrats, there's just a hair under 4 million registered Democrats. Now, of those Democrats who requested a mail-in ballot, there's 1,177,242. Essentially, these are all the Democrats that can vote in the state right now. That's 29.5% of Democrats. Okay, so the other 70.5% of Democrats that are registered in the state, unless they get a request for a mail-in ballot, they can't even vote right now until election day. And then we can see the numbers with Republicans and others. We can see that 18.5% of Republicans are the only amount of Republicans that can actually vote right now. They're actually eligible to vote. And with all the other non-party affiliates, minor parties and whatever, that's just at 18.6, so it's not much higher. Now let's go ahead and just look at the turnout numbers when it comes to these. So the composition of the vote is worrying, because usually in the past, this vote composition has been much more over 60% for the Democrats, so being under 60% is quite worrying. But you can see the turnout rate for all Democrats as of right now is 21.6%. You can see the turnout rate for all Republicans is 13%, and the turnout rate for all independents is now at 11%. And the Republicans have less of a composition of the vote, but being 32% of the vote is extremely high, considering if you look at Dr. Oz's election back in 2022, I think he only got 19 or 20% of the vote in the early voting in Pennsylvania. So that just shows right there a big shift. However, with this next slide, the one thing you need to know is if we look at those numbers that have been requested and basically say, hey, those are the only people who can vote right now, that means the ballots that have been returned is essentially the return rate, or the turnout rate, actually, of the eligible electorate right now. So essentially, this means that the turnout rate overall of eligible Democrats, because the only people that can be eligible right now are those who requested a mail-in ballot, 72% turnout of those eligible. Now, if you look at Republicans, they are 4% down at 68%, and others are at 57%. So as you can see, the Democrats are higher, and essentially a lot of the state of Pennsylvania is not eligible to vote right now. You're only eligible if you actually have requested a ballot, and that is less than a quarter of the electorate. Now, if we've been looking at a lot of the states, we see that in-person early voting is at record highs in Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, right? We're seeing record highs, but the thing is if you're in Pennsylvania, you can't do this. You can't go stand in line, go into the voting booth, actually have a ballot, mark it off, put it in the machine. If you want to do that method of voting where you actually sit there, you get the little I voted sticker and all that, you really have to wait until election day. So in this situation, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, 100% of the people in those states essentially could vote right now because they can go early or return their mail-in ballot. We can't do that in Pennsylvania. So essentially, we have to look at those turnout numbers. And the fact that the Democrats have a 4% advantage, essentially, of the turnout that we have right now, because those are the only eligible people to vote, that's actually really good for the Democrats. Now, like I said, I've been poo-pooing on mail-in votes, saying they don't mean anything. In most states, the return rate doesn't, because in early vote, you might have somebody in, let's say, Florida, who has a ballot in front of them at their house, but then they decide to go in and cast a vote in person. That ballot is just void. You don't have that option in Pennsylvania. So we are seeing the case where the turnout rate essentially for the Democrats now is 4% higher than the Republicans. And that bodes well because, as I mentioned time and time again, chances are a high percentage, either 3/4 or maybe higher, of the electorate is going to vote on election day. So to me, looking at those rates, this is starting to solidify the blue wall. Now, Pennsylvania is still a close state, and all of these states will be close states. Wisconsin, Michigan look a lot better. Pennsylvania is doing good with what we have now, even though the composition isn't there. The turnout is actually much better than Republicans. Republicans just have requested more ballots than they have before. They're not turning them in. So that shows a kind of bad turnout rate on their point. With North Carolina, looks like that the Democrats are pulling out of there. Georgia, still really close. When it comes to Nevada and Arizona, we have to wait for those nonpartisan affiliate people to vote. But the Democrats really need to start picking it up in Nevada. All right, so that is a recap for today. 1 week left. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.